Yeah, and what I wanted to talk about a lot on tonight's program was just the impact that the WWF had in Buffalo, not to mention just the live events, but they did several autograph signings. Every year the Autorama would come. I remember getting an autograph from the big boss man there. I think I told this story, but I'll tell it again. Macho Man Randy Savage was doing a signing at the Buffalo Convention Center. My grandmother and I were in line for, I think, 2.5 hours, and we probably still had another 2 hours ahead of us before he got called away. He had to get to an event in Boston that night, so we weren't able to get his autograph, but they were there for that. I remember going to, this is a little bit later on, going to Dick's Sporting Goods on Meyer Road in Amherst, meeting the 123 Kid before an event, I believe, at Niagara Falls that evening. I remember seeing the Lex Express at Arby's on Delaware Avenue in the town of Tonawanda across from Mount St. Mary's. Anything I'm forgetting, Gary or Drew, when it comes to, autograph appearances and things that I might be missing out on?
I think just the biggest thing is, WWE wrestlers genuinely enjoy what they do. And, that's something that, we all can agree with, either watching or, see. You're going to make me laugh here because, we won't go there. But I believe they truly enjoy, for the most part, what they do. Maybe not when they're at an airport, but I remember Diesel, Big Daddy Cool, 94 Melody Fair. He was just out there. Like, he wasn't planned to be out there. As people were walking in, he was just there. As people were buying his gloves, he actually signed a pair of gloves for me, and it wasn't planned. It wasn't, anything. He just was out there just looking at the crowd, counting heads. But, it was a good time.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Melody Fair. Gary, this might be a little bit over your head, but feel free to chime in whenever you want. Melody Fair was a very unique environment, a very unique venue, in that there wasn't a place where the wrestlers could secretly come into the building. You mentioned Diesel, meeting him. If that's the same event, I remember seeing Diesel drive in with Jeff Jarrett.
Yep.
And at a separate event, Bam Bam Bigelow was just hanging outside and just basically telling everybody everything about wrestling. And I was like, I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say. I still, at that point, even being a fan, I still thought I had more respect for the wrestlers than the average person did. And just hearing him kind of talk about Vader and talk about a couple other things and answering question after question, it's just a very unique environment that Melody Fair brought about it. And there was an area in the auditorium where you could go, and I believe this was the same for a Sabres game. You would see the Sabres come through from the locker room, go out to the ice, but the wrestlers also had to go from the locker room in that area to go out to the arena floor, and you could see the wrestlers, and people would kind of crowd the gate and see what was going on. And it was a really unique time. Not only mentioning because at that time I was maybe 9, 10, 11 years old, and seeing that person in person that I'm used to seeing on television every Saturday, just life-changing.
And going back to what you said, I went to a show at the Odd in '89, and I remember Andre pretty much sat or stood at the entranceway the entire time. He went out and ended up wrestling Ultimate Warrior in what happened to be the quickest match I've ever seen in my life. It was about 1.5 minutes, 4 shoulder blocks and, a splash, and that was it. But it was cool to see Andre. Like, you often, I was a kid then, so I didn't really know, but I was like, is Andre scouting talent? What's he doing? Like, that was a whole running monologue in my head, and it was just so fun to have that. It just added.
Well, if you hear stories, depending on who you hear it from, I think Andre had a lot of influence on what happened at those events. So I think he was acting as kind of like an agent and just, kind of overseeing things.
I've met more wrestlers, I had more conversations with them outside of the arenas. I'm not sure if I can mention his name, but the Rabid Wolverine, I was working at the Boulevard Mall, and, Chris Benoit comes in, and I end up, I give him a free Toronto Maple Leafs hat. He signed a couple hats for us, and he was in my store for like a half hour just talking with them. And then years later, that incident happened, but that was cool. And Batista was another guy I met he's that big. At the time, he was that big, working at a Gold's Gym. I went to pick up a buddy of mine. He was like, "Come in here, Batista's in here. Come say hi." And those were some of the best everyday people, just working out, hanging out, feeling free to talk to anybody who listened,
Yeah, don't be afraid to say that. You can mention his name. It happened. It was real history.
Yeah.
We don't have to erase it. It happened, and you lived it, and that's a great memory you shared. One thing I'm thinking of as you mentioned that was when the WWE was here. This had to have been, help me out, Andrew, when Rob Van Dam and Ric Flair were both in the company. They wrestled each other at KeyBank Center.
That would have been probably 2006, 2007.
I think earlier than that, maybe 2001,
03?
2002, 2003 maybe. It was around I believe it was around the invasion time, so maybe
Okay.
2003 is right.
Yeah.
Not feeling well, didn't want to go to the event. Glad I went to the event. And at that point in time, for the kids in the audience that are listening to this show, the Marriott was the hot spot to go. If you were a single gentleman, you had $200 to burn on a bar tab. That was the spot to be on a Saturday night, on a Friday night. I was with my cousin at the time. We rolled into the Marriott, take a look up on the elevated portion, see very, very blonde hair. I'm like, oh, there's a Bud Light there. That's Ric Flair. Not only was Ric Flair there, but you look to his left-hand side, not holding up the four fingers, Bart Arn Anderson was there. I was like, I am in the wrestling business right now. I can't go up and talk to him. I'm not going to go up and say something. That's just not what you do when you're involved in the wrestling business. Fast forward 10 years later, these wrestlers, if they're on an event with somebody that had gained any kind of notoriety, are taking a photo with them. They're changing their Facebook profile picture. They're tweeting it out. When this never mind, I'm not going there. But I had that in the back of my mind, I'm not going to say anything. My cousins go up. They talk to him, had a great conversation. You could tell they didn't want to be approached. You could tell they were there to have a good time, which was totally fine. Totally professional, dressed up, just hanging out, just kind of winding down from the night. And at that point, I would believe Arn would have been behind the scenes as an agent, because at that point in time, his career was done. But that was really a cool experience, just seeing those two guys hanging out in a Marriott that they've talked about for years and years and years.
Yeah, and going back to what you said, I'm like you, where I don't like to get pictures with people. I don't like to disturb them. At most, I may give them a nod, if I see them, just kind of an acknowledgement, but shows that, we've worked together, with name talent. People are always like, well, did you get a picture with them? And I'm like, no, because that's not what you do. But yeah, you see them out and about town, especially if they got a hangover to go to Toronto right after, you'll see them, hit the town here and, sober up on the ride back to Toronto. I don't know if they do that now, because it seems like a lot of them are into, vegan, vegetarian, protein video games.